Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you are all doing well. Today we are continuing with the Lost series. So we've already spoken about Jack, Kate, Sawyer and Locke, and today we're talking about Sayid. This was actually a character that a few people had commented on those previous videos and requested. So I'm really excited and thank you so much for the people that requested to talk about Sayid next. It makes picking the next character a lot easier for me. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Katie and I am a qualified professional therapist who's been in private practice now for 3 years. I make videos on all kinds of different things. I do vlogs, I do reaction videos, I talk about TV, obviously. I talk about mental health and how to improve your mental health. So please check out the channel and subscribe for upcoming videos. Definitely subscribe if you're a Lost fan because we'll be continuing this series as well. And please follow me on Instagram. I post a lot of short form content over there around what it's like to be a therapist, how to access therapy, how to find the right therapist for you. So definitely check that out and give me a follow over there. And please like this video as well if you enjoy it, if you like Lost, if you're a fan of Sayid. Let's get cracking. So just forewarning, I will be obviously talking about the show. There will be spoilers for anyone that hasn't completed the show yet. I do talk about things across all 6 seasons. I don't talk about everything. So what I've loved in the previous videos is that people have commented on things that I haven't mentioned or spoke about moments with the character that stood up to them that again I might have skipped past or left out or forgotten about. So obviously I try and cover as many of the main things as I possibly can, but I really encourage discussion and for people to talk about their relationship with these characters. If you watch this video and you think, oh, she's not spoken about this, or that Sayid moment was actually really important to me, please feel free to let me know down below. And please feel free to request the next character that I talk about as well. That would be great. And also, if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic, a particular question around Sayid, there will be chapters down below as well. So feel free to watch the sections that you're the most interested in. So yeah, I'm excited to get into talking about Sayid from a professional, therapeutic perspective, and also obviously a personal perspective as well. You know, it's definitely going to be a blend of the two. Obviously I try and keep it professional, but I have my own biases as a fan of the show and my own perception of things, so it's definitely a bit of both. So if Sayid was coming to therapy, obviously the first thing that tends to happen is that a person shares their story. So we want to talk about Sayid's story and journey first, and of course the first thing that comes to mind is childhood. So the scene that stands out when it comes to Sayid's childhood is the scene with his eldest brother and his dad. His dad is basically asking the 2 boys to kill the chickens. I think, we think he's focusing on the oldest brother actually. He's really struggling with it, can't do it. And then Sayid does it. He kills the chicken and his dad makes a comment like, well, at least I know one of my sons will be a man someday, which straight away says to me around the messaging that was received over childhood about what being a man looks like, about violence as well, about death, really becoming desensitized and normalized and also encouraged as well, because it's like you are more valued if you're able to do this versus no sort of recognition of any attachment that there might be to the animals, any emotions, or just not wanting to do something, whether it's fear, being upset. So an encouragement of more being emotionless and hardened, which is really interesting when you think of Sayid as an adult. That to me really stands out, and I think another interesting thing about that scene is that Sayid, he doesn't do it because he wants to do it, he does it for the greater good, and the greater good is a theme throughout Sayid's whole life, having to make choices and weigh up everything and make the right decision, almost like a cost-benefit analysis that he constantly has to to do. And in that case, he wanted to protect his brother. It is rooted in emotion, is rooted in care for his brother. So he did the thing. He did the thing that he had to do. The other thing about childhood is obviously we know that he went to school with Nadia and she kind of pushed him in the mud or whatever, like she kind of pushed him in the playground as a sign of affection, but he didn't realise that. He's young and wasn't able to recognise that, but that's something that he finds out as an adult. But obviously we'll get to meeting Nadia later. The sort of next part of Sayid's story, jumping ahead then, is he worked for about 5 years or so as a communications officer in the Republican Guard. And this is where obviously he learned a lot of those crucial skills that are amazing when we get to the island. So this is obviously where he built so much of his skill set, but he also took part in like morally questionable acts as well, which we'll get to. Something key that happens is that the US forces capture, infiltrate, I'm not going to get all the militant terms completely correct, but they capture his base, and essentially because he speaks English, they ask him to interrogate his commanding officer. And obviously because of loyalty, at first he's like, absolutely not. But then the American soldiers play him a video of gas being set off in his home village, and that's by the people that he's working for. So obviously again that makes him kind of question everything, question his judgment, his choices, his loyalty obviously. And then he does end up interrogating and torturing his own commanding officer, and he is released and paid as well. So again, there's that theme of what's the right choice for me when I take everything into consideration. I think he gets promoted, and again, there's a lot of interrogations and torture with prisoners of war, essentially, people that are seen to have betrayed their country. And Nadia, who was part of an insurgent group, she gets captured and he has to interrogate her. This kind of wakes him up because this is somebody that he has an existing connection with from years ago. She shares about the kind of pushing in the playground and feelings. They develop a connection through the interrogations, and he softens big time when it comes to her. She facilitates him again questioning his loyalty to what he's doing, to the cause, so to speak. It ends up that he makes the decision to shoot people, kill his own, and help her flee, which is a massive 180 from what was happening before. But it reminds me of the brother situation in terms of when he feels, when he loves, when he cares about somebody, he is able to kind of step out of duty and do actually what he feels is right, which is a really interesting character trait, because that's not a quick decision. He does do it quite quickly, but that's not an easy decision, is what I mean, is going from one extreme to the other in the name of love and what he feels, again, is the right thing for the greater good. He's quite smart with it as well, because he even shoots himself in the leg and makes it, look like an escape, basically, but out of fear for his own family. So he really thinks it through in terms of all the moving parts. And this is the episode where, obviously she wants him to escape as well and go with her. And he says, "You'll find me in the next life, if not in this one," which ends up being a quote that, it's a really beautiful quote that, again, is a bit of a thread throughout. It's definitely linked to the themes of loss in terms of seeing people in the next life. So there's a massive connection there, but it's also just a massive connection with him and Nadia as well, because Sayid does live multiple different lives and is searching and longing for her. He carries the photo with that quote written on the back. And then we know from then on, he moves from place to place, basically searching for Nadia, not spending too much time in the one location, and is on this constant journey where he's trying to find her. We also know that he was a chef in Paris at one point, and this is a really emotional flashback story where he's trying to escape his past. He becomes a chef, he sort of lies about his identity, but one of his torture victims recognizes him, because of course she does. It's not a face that you would forget. He denies it for absolutely ages, and then eventually is able to admit it was him. And there's this really emotional moment where he has to confront what he did to this woman and the impact that it's had mentally. I love the story that she tells about the cat as like an analogy or a metaphor for how she's been ever since that happened, emotionally and mentally. And he is really distraught, obviously, listening to that, and has to admit and confess. And he says that he remembers every single face of the people. So really what this unlocks is everything that Sayid is carrying, like the guilt and the shame, the mental torture that he's under because of the crimes that he committed against people, the kind of barbaric nature of what he had to do to certain people. I'm using had to do because that's a question in itself around like choices, right? Of what you have to do versus what you chose to do. And I think with Sayid, that line gets blurred all the time. So that's a really emotional moment that really expresses the impact and pain that Sayid is in because of the pain that he has caused other people. And then finally, his like whole reason for being in Australia then is obviously quite significant in terms of what happens there. Once again, he is recruited to infiltrate a like terrorist organization, essentially become an informant in Australia for the Australian CIA. One of the members of that sort of terrorist group is an old friend of his, because of course it is. You've got Nadia, this, of course, it's kind of happened again where he is put in a situation where he obviously really cares about his old friend, but the CIA have told him that they know where Nadia is if he does this. So it's like, what do I do? Weighing up the options again, what is the morally right thing to do? And then really tragically, obviously a bit of a trigger warning here actually before I talk about a trigger warning for suicide. But his friend essentially finds out about the infiltration and the betrayal, like as Sayid is trying to do the right thing and talk him out of it, and he ends up shooting himself, which is, really, awful. And, Sayid feels really guilty, but he like gets what he wants because he gets information about Nadia's location, which is why he's on the plane. But of course we know that he doesn't get to Nadia, which is really tragic in itself actually, because he goes through so much in order to finally get the information that he needs of where she is. And then of course he's involved in a big plane crash. So this is where we meet Sayid then, which is on the island. So that's the kind of flashback stuff of his story so far. So when we meet Sayid in season 1, obviously we meet him fighting with Sawyer, I think, is like the first scene with Sayid. I could be wrong about that, but that's kind of like the first scene that stands out to me in the pilot episode, because he's getting like quite racist accusations and stereotypes thrown at him. It's quite interesting actually that, Sawyer's calling him a terrorist and things like that. And actually in Australia, they threatened him with charges. He was arrested, I think at Heathrow Airport actually, on terrorist charges. And that's kind of how they are able to manipulate him into infiltrating in Australia. So yeah, but obviously at that point you don't know any of that, and you just think like, of course, like Sayid's getting the blame for this plane crash, which is pretty terrible. We also get a taste of his skill set already, because he's like looking at walkie-talkies, and obviously they go on the hike up the mountain, and he's able to understand the kind of code and beeping of what they pick up from Rousseau. I'm not using the most technical language here, but basically Sayid's like an expert. Boy, does that come in handy when it comes to being on the island, even if some of his plans are sabotaged by Locke. Obviously won't go into that, that's all in the Locke video, but Sayid is a great person to have around. I know that if I was on the island, I'd want to be near him, because he sort of knows what he's doing in lots of different ways. A key thing that happens in season 1 is that his other skills, not so much the technology side of things, get put to use when Sawyer lies about having Shannon's medication. They want to know where it is. This is where they sort of go quite animalistic on the island, and they want to use any means possible, and Sayid is like, I can get him to talk, I can use my skills. This is again a really good example of Sayid doing something that's very morally wrong. Like, you should not be torturing people, but he's doing it with good intentions in a way, or like, again, he's thinking of everyone. He's sort of seeing it as, what do we need as a collective? And you've got Jack and you've got Kate, people trying, obviously Boone got beaten up, Shannon struggling to breathe. And the way Sayid works is that he reviews all of that and is like, well, I can try, like I can try my skills. And of course, you know, Jack does tell him to stop at one point because he has probably never seen anything like that in his life. It's quite hard to watch. Even with a character like Sawyer, who is at that point anyway, like very annoying, very hostile, very antagonistic, but still obviously, you know, doesn't deserve to have that underneath his nails and stuff like that. So with the shame of what happens there, Sayid decides to leave. He feels like he can't or doesn't deserve to be around people. He almost, you know, it's really interesting. It's almost like the reason he did that was probably through the connections that he was making already. Because the thing about Sayid actually versus other characters is that he's kind of friends with everyone. Like, as I was preparing for this video, that's something that I was reflecting on, was he really has like a good friendship. You know, if I think of season 1, he's got a good friendship with Kate, he's got a connection with Charlie, good connection with Jack, a really good connection with Hurley, obviously Shannon, which we'll talk about. He really is someone that they all seem to like quite quickly, probably because of his skill set, and also he's quite like a polite and courteous person with the way he speaks as well, and very like rational. He's not flying off the handle and losing it and getting really irate with people like in the same way Jack can sometimes, or even Locke or Sawyer obviously. So I think through the shame, he's like, well, I don't trust myself to be around these people that I'm forming connections with. He says to Kate that I swore I would never do anything like that again. And he's broken that promise to himself and to people in general. So he feels like he has to leave and remove himself, which is really interesting and really speaks to, again, that amount of shame that he feels about what he's done, obviously both to Sawyer and just in general. He stumbles upon Rousseau, which is another really interesting character relationship. He's able to build trust with her. You know, this is someone that's lived on the island for a very long time and you know, obviously mentally not all there and struggling, you know, basically, and has no trust whatsoever. It takes a while, but he's able to build a connection with her, which really says a lot about Sayid to me in terms of his communication skills, which is obviously quite like obvious as a communications officer, and able to build rapport with people and to build trust with people. And they also bond over grief and losing someone. That's how he's able to connect and build rapport, and she's able to see that in his eyes. I think he uses his skills in like a clinical sense, but I think it's more the emotional side of what he talks about and what he shares and what he sees in her and what she sees in him around Alex, around Nadia. That's what they connect with, which is, you know, it's a really good episode, that episode. Another sort of line that stands out to me with Sayid is when he talks about hope and how crucial that is to survival. And that to me is really interesting in terms of being like an ex-soldier. I think with everything that Sayid's been through, I imagine hope in a war, in the military, is really important, because if you lose it, you start to lose yourself, you start to lose your sanity, I imagine, and if things start to feel too hopeless and people give up and people, you know, make really irrational or emotional decisions. And he's seen all that firsthand, I imagine, and experienced that. So that was just an interesting thing that stood out to me, is when at one point in season 1, he's like, if you take away their hope, you essentially are taking away everything. And that's why his advice is basically to keep certain things to themselves and not stress the whole campsite out, which also speaks to like a leadership. You can tell that he was like high up in the army as well, and had people that he was a leader to. And you can, even though like Jack again is the leader role, you've also got Locke as a bit of a leader role. Sayid is up there as well for me, because he definitely has really strong leadership skills. Of course, other standout things in season 1 is he's really kind to a lot of people and builds close relationships. You particularly see that with Charlie, you see that with Hurley, and then obviously with Shannon as well. He asked her to translate some notes, and you know, she doesn't have, obviously I'll talk about Shannon in her video, but she has very low self-esteem. I think he does practice quite a lot of like patience and kindness towards her, and they start to build a bit of like a romantic connection. Something else that really struck me as a really kind moment with Sayid is when Boone dies, and how he is with Shannon. I think is really beautiful. The fact that she's unable to speak at the funeral, so he speaks, and his speech is really moving and beautiful, even though he didn't really have like the best relationship with Boone, and obviously doesn't know him very well. That again, it really just speaks to who Sayid really is when you see these acts of warmth and kindness and compassion, really strong amounts of compassion for other people. And another moment that I love in season 1 in regards to this is when he says to Shannon in the season 1 finale, she's like, it's too much, and she's got loads of bags, and of course she's not really talking about the bags, she's grieving, they're running away from the others, there's a whole load of stuff going on, and Sayid says, it won't be too much if I carry it for you. I love that so much, because he's like talking about the bags, but he's not talking about the bags. He's basically saying like, I'm there. He's encouraging her to share, obviously, with him, and basically telling her and reminding her that this isn't all on her shoulders. Like, he is there with her to support her, to back her, to carry the weight of what's going on for her. And I just think it's really touching. It's kind of like an underrated moment. I think it's very romantic, it's very kind, and again, it's sort of one of the reasons why Sayid is such a great character, because of moments like that. So moving on to season 2 then, this is where, you know, it all kind of goes wrong for Sayid big time when Shannon dies, which is of course really tragic. He has opened himself up to love again after everything he's been through with Nadia. He's really softened. He's still Sayid, but he, you know, is romantic. And I think like at the beginning of season 2, it's like the real Sayid, like who he is at his core. If perhaps he hadn't been a soldier, this is who Sayid is, and Sayid is a romantic, and he's a really passionate person and a compassionate person. That all gets stripped away when Ana Lucia accidentally shoots Shannon, and you see something kind of switch off in Sayid, and the kind of rage comes back, and the anger and revenge as well. Revenge is a big theme for Sayid. There's a really standout moment after Shannon dies with him and Ana Lucia, where she basically is like, here you go, you can shoot me. And he says, what good would it do if we're both already dead? And this is again something that we see multiple times throughout the show with Sayid, is this idea of being a bit dead inside. When someone goes through so much, even if they're able to recover, which Sayid has moments where he's able to recover, you're very easily able to slip back as well. And I think that's what happens here. Sayid, because of all the horrendous things that he's seen and done in his previous life, there is like part of him that is like emotionally stunted and a bit dead inside. Then that part of him is able to, you know, on the island, be a bit more free, to soften, as I said before, and then Shannon dies and the grief completely takes over and he hardens again, and he probably feels incredibly emotionless again. So it all just very quickly, like an elastic band, pings back. And I feel like that line is so powerful to really sum that up, where like revenge wouldn't even do anything for him. That's how little he is feeling. But of course we see later that of course like he is still feeling a lot, like his grief and his rage and his pain is really palpable, and how that is released is later on through Ben. Now at this point he's Henry Gale, and we're unsure at that point who he is. Is he telling the truth? Is he Henry? Is he not? Who is this person? Sayid uses his skills again, not quite in the same way as he did with Sawyer, but still he's using his skills. And Sayid's very good at being able to tell when someone is lying, and I love the way that he finds out that Henry is lying, because he basically starts asking about his wife and burying her and stuff like that, and he gets really angry and starts crying and says, you would remember every single shovel if you had to bury somebody. And I'm like, that is true as well, and I think that's amazing that that's how he is like, this person's a liar, it's not true. It kind of reminds me, I watch, this is going to sound really silly, but I watch a lot of Judge Judy, and I find the way that Judge Judy finds out if someone's lying really interesting, and she tends to ask quite mundane questions. And the reason she does that is because if someone's telling the truth, they just have a very simple answer, or an answer that makes sense. That can be whether it makes sense emotionally or logically, and Sayid uses a similar thing, where he's asking questions like how many shovels and stuff, and then he's like, I don't know, and he's like, you would would know though. You would know, and he just doesn't trust the sort of lack of emotion or all of that. So then he obviously takes it all out on Ben though. He like beats him up and gets really angry and, you know, starts kind of violently attacking him. That's all of the emotion pouring out because it's probably at that point it's been stunted beforehand. He's just in a lot of pain. Like Hurley's tried to help him. His friends have tried to help him, but he's in so much pain and emotionally shut down. And Ben, his anger with being lied to is really what unlocks all of the emotion, and he's able to process some of his grief by like punching him basically and getting a lot of that out. So that's a massive Sayid moment there. So as I said, I'm not going to go into absolutely everything. In season 3 and 4, it's kind of like Sayid is really more soldier-esque, I would say. He's kind of, this obviously things on the island have ramped up when it comes to the others. So Sayid, a bit like Kate actually, is always the character that will volunteer to go on missions to help people, to step into action, to battle. That's something that I've noticed throughout, and that gets stronger as time goes on. Because I think more stuff is happening. You know, it kind of requires him to get into that mode. But I also think emotionally so much has happened to Sayid that he's more able to be in that mode. You know, if Shannon had lived, that would have looked completely different, I think. I think he would have been Sayid the soldier, but he would have made different choices as well, like staying with Shannon or like not continuously putting his life at risk necessarily. You know, it would have looked very different, I think, if Shannon had stayed alive. Because Shannon died, he's got friends, but he's still, again, a bit like Kate, he finds it hard to completely emotionally connect to people in a way that makes him consider not sacrificing himself or not kind of stepping up. But fundamentally, I think he's just very aware that they need him. He is a good fighter. He's got all the skills that I keep talking about. So it would be a disservice if he didn't do certain things. And I think because he's conscious of that, he's just more than willing, in the same way that Jack, knowing that he's a doctor, you know, he knows that he has to be the medical professional on that island. So it's like everyone has their role, and Sayid is very conscious of his role. What's interesting about season 4 is that out of the two teams, you've got Team Locke and you've got Team Jack that I talk about in the previous videos. Sayid goes with Jack even though he doesn't trust the people coming. You know, Charlie was a friend of his, and obviously with that message and everything. Hurley is also a friend of his. Pretty much with all the people in that other group, he doesn't trust Locke. Again, we've just seen, I speak about this a lot in my Locke video, but Locke really kind of messes up in terms of building trust with the group. So again, Sayid, very smart, weighing up everything. He doesn't trust the people coming, but he decides to stick with Jack. He doesn't trust Locke in particular because he blew up the submarine, which obviously was their, you know, best chance of some people getting off the island. Locke has also sabotaged Sayid previously in like season 1, so that relationship is not good. So it makes sense to me that Sayid, as a more practical person, would go with Jack, even though emotionally I think he's more like believing Hurley, obviously believes Charlie as well. And something else that's very like soldier-esque is how he sort of gets his spot in terms of being rescued, like his spot on the ship and on the helicopter is by exchanging Charlotte. So obviously a lot happens that I haven't got into with the people from the helicopter. It's such a militant thing to happen, like a trade, a swap of individuals, something that I imagine happened a lot when he was in the army, and he uses that to get ahead. So again, we're just seeing a character really utilize their experience to get rescued. And of course we know that he is one of the Oceanic Six and does get rescued. So moving on to Sayid's story off the island. So really amazingly and touching, we find out that he was able to find Nadia. Obviously the Oceanic Six are celebrities, on the news and stuff, so they were able to reunite, and it's a really beautiful, it's a really touching moment. But of course, because this show just doesn't like, you know, people being happy, it is short-lived. They get married, but unfortunately after a few months, she is killed. She's hit by a car, and he finds out through Ben that she was murdered by Widmore. Again, I've spoke about this before, the switch, you know, he's the romantic husband, compassionate, you know, you see them laughing, that's Sayid. Then obviously we turn into a robot, emotionless. and he becomes Ben's assassin, and he's all about revenge because he's got nothing else to live for. So he starts murdering all the different people that were potentially involved in the death of Nadia, even if it's like loosely, if they're just basically part of that team, because it's obviously Widmore versus Ben. He's got a list of people and he goes through them all, even ones that he builds like a romantic connection with, and he kills everybody until he actually runs out of people. It's just interesting how quickly he falls into that role again. He's Ben's soldier. He's literally Ben's soldier, Ben of all people as well. He's just able to slip into it. But again, I don't think he slips into it always through grief. He always slips into it through pain, because it's kind of what he knows. It's like falling back on your own skills. I understand from like an identity perspective how and why that happens. So Ben ends that relationship because Sayid's not needed anymore, and I imagine he feels then incredibly lost, and I didn't even say that on purpose, but yeah, he obviously feels very lost in his life at this point, like what's next for him. And then we find out that he actually goes away to the Dominican Republic, I believe, and he's like building houses for like Habitat for Humanities kind of thing, obviously trying to like make amends and do something good and be productive and use his skills, I guess, in a completely different way, and probably learn new skills as well, which I think is really interesting. We obviously don't hear loads about that journey, but I think that is a really interesting path that he ends up taking. It sounds like quite a healing thing for him. So it's really bad timing then when Locke visits him. Again, bearing in mind this is somebody that he doesn't particularly trust. Locke is like, can you please come back to the island? Sayid, with the place that he's at right now, where he's like trying to move forward, I guess, and heal and process and actually do good in the world, says no. And it's quite an easy no for him for that reason. He also thinks that Locke is being manipulated as well, which not in that specific instance, but in general, Locke is, as I spoke about in his video, very easily manipulated. So I can understand why Sayid's saying that, but he's basically like, I was a soldier for somebody, now I think you are, so I'm not falling into this. I'm not doing this again. So that's a hard no. So he doesn't come back that way. But what I do find quite touching is that when Ben visits him and basically points out like Hurley might be in danger, that's kind of what sucks him back into like the group's drama, so to speak. I'm just calling it the group's drama because there's always so much going on, and obviously Sayid was kind of living his life, building houses out there, and then he gets sucked back in because he wants to help Hurley, which I just think is quite sweet and speaks to that. They're quite like an underrated friendship in the show, I feel like. I don't know what characters he would have done that for, but Hurley is certainly one of them. So he gets pulled back in and he basically has to rescue Hurley, and a lot happens there. And it's quite funny actually, because as I said, he gets kind of pulled back in again, but because he doesn't trust Ben, who's, after Locke's died, you know, encouraging them, I guess with Jack as well, to all go back to the island. He's like, I don't trust you at all. In his mind, Ben has like ruined his life in more ways than one. So he's like, I'm out of here. But Destiny and the island, or whatever you want to call it, has other ideas, and he is arrested by Alana, actually, another character. And of course, he's on the same plane. He even tries to really fight it by getting her to go on a later flight, and obviously she's like, no, or whatever. And yeah, he ends up on the flight of all the other characters of the Oceanic Six, and history repeats itself, and bam, we're back on the island. So being back on the island is a really interesting journey for Sayid. He is, obviously we're in like the 1970s, he is seen as an other, or hostile is the phrase that they use. So he's captured because they think that he's a hostile, and that's where he meets young Ben, which is like, oh my god, that sort of cliffhanger of that episode is really good, because they're like, how is this going to play out, what's going to happen? And it is very intense, and it really opens up the question of like, I feel like they do this a lot in any kind of time travel thing, of like, if you can change something, would you do it? Like, would you go back in time and kill Hitler? I feel like it's the big one that people ask, and considering the kind of effects of that. And this is somebody who Sayid truly believes has like destroyed his life, made him a terrible person again, like pushed him down a really dark path. Also has just seen what he's done to like other people as well. He blames Ben for quite a lot. This is almost the ultimate greater good question, isn't it? That would you, if you met Hitler as a child, would you kill him? Would you kill him as a young boy? And, you know, I don't have an answer for that. You know, it's just a really interesting philosophical question and a really interesting moral question as well to kind of ask yourself. And Sayid obviously is someone that is always considering the big picture. He's not considering like the way Kate is. Kate is very like, this is a boy, this is a child. Almost more like a simplistic view of what's happening in the immediate. Sayid is not thinking that way at all. Sayid's thinking of the big picture, what happens next, what happens in the future, what can be prevented, and shoots young Ben, which of course a lot of people, kind of similar to Locke actually, this is where he loses some people. I think a lot of people really judge him for that choice, which is a shame actually, because like, as I said, Sayid is somebody that everyone kind of likes and gets on with and has a lot of respect for. And I do think that gets a bit lost after he makes this choice. I'm not saying that people like suddenly really dislike him, but they certainly are a bit more like wary of him and think that his judgment in that situation was quite poor. Obviously, Ben gets healed and it gets resolved, but I think what is also interesting is that Sayid really supports Jack in the hydrogen bomb. Again, it's like a similar version of what he was trying to do with Ben, which is a reset. He really believes in the idea that Jack has said, what's the best thing for everyone? If we can prevent the pain and the suffering, let's do it. Other people, again, like Kate and Sawyer and Juliet at first, but then obviously she changes her mind, think like, no, we've built a life, we've built connections, we don't want to forget everything that's happened. And I think it's an interesting schools of thought, isn't it, either way? You know, do you want to erase certain things that have been positive? I guess that's the sacrifice, if you want to erase all the bad as well, and there has been a lot of bad, and I guess Sayid and Jack are more thinking of the people that have died. You know, there's been a lot of death. I totally get like both sides of it, but I just think it's interesting that once again Sayid is like siding with Jack and supports the bomb. And season 5 basically ends with him getting shot. So then moving on to season 6, it's about his healing with that, and then we've got the temple and all of that, and this is where it gets all very bizarre and actually quite sad with Sayid. Almost you could argue like his character's done a bit dirty. I'd love to know what people think of what happens to Sayid's character in season 6, because basically he gets healed at the temple, then there's like this test which discovers that he is again basically dead inside and completely evil, and you know, we see him pulling quite sinister faces and showing no empathy towards certain situations, which I don't know, I felt like it wasn't a very enjoyable watch as someone that really likes Sayid. I remember being like, what has happened to his character? Like, where's the Sayid that we know and love? Because he was so sort of empty and cold, and we didn't know what was going to happen and where that storyline was going to go. Then the man in black / Locke recruits him, again, a soldier for somebody. It's just interesting that he once again falls into that role. He is somebody's soldier. He is doing the work for someone else, a higher power. I think the reason he agrees this time is because obviously he's not himself, and again, he doesn't really have much to live for. There's sort of nothing left for him. I think he even says something along those lines anyway, where he's just like, there's nothing for me anymore. He doesn't feel anything, he doesn't care about anything. There's no like, I want to leave the island. There's no like, I want to this. There's no like desire or push forward. So it's kind of like a why not be somebody that is recruited and starts doing stuff like that for him. So I think that's the reason why. What's great is that it does become undone. It becomes undone when he's asked to kill Desmond, which is interesting. And again, this is somebody that he's had a relationship with, a connection with, and he doesn't do it. So to me, I'm like, that was really great, because we're being told that he's dead inside and evil and not the same person, and essentially like a blank slate. Whereas obviously him not killing Desmond, that goes against what the man in black wanted. And so is the Sayid that we know and love back, or still in there somehow? And obviously it's not really explained or anything, but it's almost like you're able to fight through whatever it is that's happened to him. And he certainly is able to do that in his own way. So that's the turning point. And of course, through that, he ends up rejoining the core group of islanders. He, goes against Locke / the man in black. And then of course we have the most tragic episode of the whole show, which is the submarine episode. And this is where Sayid really does the ultimate greater good thing, which is kind of fitting for his character. We don't really know if he's fully healed. It's, again, something's being shifted because he doesn't kill Desmond and he rejoins his people. He weighs up everything in a split second. Like, there's so much happening in that scene with like Jack and Sawyer battling, and Sawyer's lost trust in Jack, which I've obviously spoken about before, and no one knows what to do, right? And there's literally a countdown. And Sayid is able, in his Sayid way, to make a really quick decision, weighing up everything. He obviously knows on some level that he's not quite the same anymore. There's still an element of him that's there, which is why it's so sad. It could have been developed further. But fundamentally, I think Sayid knows that he's not quite the same anymore. He's been through so much. Something's changed within him. And considering all of that, he picks up the bomb, runs off, tries to obviously mitigate the damage as much as possible, and sacrifices himself in order to hopefully save everyone else. And, you know, it makes me really sad and a bit emotional talking about it, because it is like the ultimate sacrifice. And that is where we end with Sayid. Obviously, I want to talk a bit about the flash sideways, kind of like technically what happens next after his death. So I believe in the flash sideways, he was still a soldier, still a torturer, but he also then like worked for an oil company. And the really interesting thing is that he pushed Nadia to be with his brother, of all people, like two people that he's always kind of put ahead of himself. He encourages them to be together because he feels like he doesn't deserve to be with her, which is really sad. Like, he feels unworthy, basically, of her love. Then there's a whole situation with loan sharks with his brother. He gets into a situation, his brother asks him for help, which he's like, no at first, but then he kind of uses his affection for Nadia as a way to get him to help. And Sayid still doesn't really want to be involved, but the loan sharks kind of find him, essentially. And then, you know, he, as usual, he's kind of pushed into a corner where he has to use his skills and fight and kill people. But interestingly enough, he doesn't sort of take things as far as he perhaps previously would. Like, for example, he puts one of them in like a freezer, but leaves him like a box cutter so that he will be able to get out. Those kind of subtle differences where he's like second guessing himself a little bit more and doesn't want to completely do the wrong thing. I just think it's sad that kind of violence was thrown upon him, because he even says at one point, he's like, I'm not that man anymore. I'm not like this anymore. And I feel like his affection for Nadia is always being used against him. Like, it happened in his life, it's happening in death, it's happening, you know, in this situation as well. So yeah, it's a shame that it even got to that point. Then basically in this world, he's arrested by Sawyer, which is quite funny, and Desmond helps him escape, essentially. And then Hurley, who's also in the know. At this point, certain people are like in the know of what's happening. Hurley, his good mate, abducts him and helps him remember by taking him somewhere where there's like a bar fight happening, and Shannon gets like pushed and it's all horrible. And then Sayid, being like the bit of hero that he is and is very against certain things being wrong. I think particularly violence against women is something that he clearly feels very strongly about, that we've seen throughout. And he steps in and sees Shannon and then remembers, and they're like reunited, and it's really like romantic. And how do people feel about Nadia not being his like person versus Shannon? For me, I've got mixed thoughts about it, in terms of, I think he even says at one point that, you know, Nadia is like the love of his life, and, you know, she's such a core thread throughout the entire show and his story. However, I do also understand that the flash sideways and the ending of the whole show is about how the people on the island were the most important people in each other's lives, and so it kind of had to be Shannon. And of course, he did love Shannon. That was also a really like valid love in his life. I'm a bit conflicted. I mean, I don't dislike the ending at all, but I can understand why some people are like, shouldn't it be Nadia? So let me know what you think about that, because I think that would be really interesting to hear what people think. So now I want to talk about core themes in Sayid's life, in Sayid's story, what core themes I would expect to come up in therapy. So definitely violence and crime. I feel like not every client obviously shares anything like that. I would massively expect that to be a theme. Sayid actually commits more crime and violent acts than any other character, and so that would be a big thing in the sessions, especially as he does a lot of it sort of in cold blood in a way, or acts of revenge as well. He sort of goes into like that mode where he's just doing it. And so the bodies and the impact really do start to pile up. I think that really links to another core theme, which is essentially blood on his hands that he is struggling to wash off his entire life. That really is the root of what he'd be seeking therapy for, is that there's a lot of blood on his hands, there's a lot of things that he's done, and every time he tries to wash it off, more gets added, or something else happens, or another really tough decision has to be made. So I think that would be a big theme as well. Having said that, I think a way that Sayid rationalizes it a lot of the time is that anytime he was quite violent on the island, usually it was for the advantage. Usually it was to support the team, to support the other islanders. And so I think part of the sessions would be really bringing attention to that, bringing that side of it to life in order to ease his shame, which links to another major theme that I've spoke about a lot. It's the title of one of Sayid's episodes, which is the greater good, and talking about what that means to him and why that's important to him. Like, I think that would be a massive thing to explore, because that can mean different things to different people, and Sayid has quite a big perception of what the big picture and the greater good is. I also think atonement, redemption, what it means to be a good person, all of that would be explored. They're all massive themes as well. And also passion and love and longing and grief would all be themes as well, because he really is a passionate person. He is, seen him fall in love, and we've seen him lose that as well. And we've seen him long for Nadia and the impact of that. So I think all of that would be topics to explore. And that leads to the next question then, which is how would I help Sayid? So I've already touched on this a little bit, but I want to talk a bit more about in what ways would I support him. So definitely some kind of trauma therapy. Sayid's gone through a lot of trauma. I imagine he has PTSD. A lot of veterans have PTSD. He's seen a lot, he's done a lot. We can't imagine what that's like. So definitely therapy that would be specific to that, to supporting PTSD, trauma. Absolutely. Definitely exploring his self-image, how he sees himself, how he reconciles with who he is versus what he's done. Because I imagine they're two completely different people that we've kind of touched upon, like separating him and his skills from the violent acts that he's committed. I think there'd be a lot of confronting what he did, a bit like with that woman that he tortured and that he saw in Paris, going through each person. What faces does he see? Who does he remember? Talking about it, really releasing something and confronting it head on so that he can process each and every single one in order to move a bit more forward. And that balance of like self-forgiveness and easing shame, but also like accountability as well and responsibility. And exploring the question, what would it take for him to feel redeemed? Because I feel like that's something that he's always chasing. He wants to be redeemed, he wants to atone, he wants to wash the blood off his hands. And sometimes when we have an ambiguous goal like that, we're always moving towards it, but do we ever reach it? That's like the question. And so I'd explore what that would look like for him, what that would need to look like for him. So the next thing I want to talk about is his key relationships on the show. Who do I expect to come up in the therapy room, perhaps have some sessions about? Definitely his dad, definitely his brother, definitely Nadia, obviously, definitely Shannon. In terms of islanders, as I said, he's kind of got friendships with everyone, but I imagine Hurley would be someone that would definitely come up. Definitely Desmond as well, and of course Ben. Ben would definitely have numerous sessions about, because him and Ben go through a lot, and how he sees Ben, and obviously what happens with child Ben as well. So much needs processing there, so definitely that one as well. And the final question then that I want to talk about is, how does Sayid change? So obviously Lost is very much a journey, and a lot of the characters do change along the way. As I've pointed out before, Sayid is very up and down because he keeps having setbacks. It's very up and down as he kind of wrestles with his like inner violence that gets like re-triggered every time something happens, whether it's losing Shannon or stuff with Ben, or obviously losing like Nadia later on. Different things happen that like resets him into soldier mode essentially, and then obviously in the final season it completely resets, and he's like an empty shell, essentially. So Sayid changes a lot. He's quite, it's weird because he's quite a consistent character, really, but he also goes on quite an up and down journey. We see him soften when he falls in love, and then we see him harden when he loses them. A really standout turning point for me, though, in terms of Sayid is when he's working for Ben, and when the final target is completed and he runs out of people and there's no one to avenge for Nadia's death anymore. And it just really strikes me the emptiness of what that would feel like and what that must have like done to Sayid's psyche. So that's like a big turning point for me in terms of Sayid's story, and his want then to do real good and going to the Dominican Republic and wanting to build the houses. Again, we don't really get to see that change, but I'd love to be able to. I'd love to be able to see what happens where he's like, actually, I'm going to do this instead because of everything I've been through, because that just seems like a massive switch and healing moment for him. But what I love about Sayid that I think really speaks to the change in him is that he is moved by his care for others. So again, he makes that decision to be there. He doesn't want to go with Locke, but he's moved by his care for Hurley. He doesn't want the same thing to happen to Hurley that happened to him. Then later on, obviously, he's moved by like care for Desmond and care for all the other islanders, even when he's supposed to be completely evil and dead inside. So that really speaks to me of the pure humanity that has been in Sayid all along, that leads him to completely sacrifice himself for the greater good. So that is everything. Probably quite a long video. So if you got to this point, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Sayid. What an interesting character, what a great character. Please let me know your thoughts down below. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to my channel for more upcoming videos. Please follow me on Instagram as well, because as I said, I post lots of different things over there, so definitely go check that out. And yeah, thank you so much for watching again. I will hopefully see you in the next one, and take care. Bye.